Welcome to Distracted, the podcast with Angela Lockwood, the place where you will find practical brain-boosting strategies, expert insights, and real-life stories to help busy brains thrive in the age of distraction. Let's go. Welcome to Distracted. I'm Angela Lockwood, and today I am joined by Mel Marsden. And Mel, every time I meet her, just exudes beautiful design in everything she does. And if you head on over to her website, design is the central being of what she does. Everything looks beautiful. But the one thing you'll get out of our conversation today, I'm sure, is that Mel is more than just the aesthetics. Mel actually, as the founder of Community, the author of The Next Workplace, and podcast host of Work Life by Design, she's a workplace strategist and design lead for some of the biggest companies like Entain, Hall Chadwick, Fathom, and the City of Gold Coast. And one thing I know that she puts into the design of all of these spaces is the center of the employee experience, how people's well-being can flourish in those spaces, not just how does the space look. And I can't wait to get into the conversation with Mel today because you know where we work is so important. It has such a pivotal impact on our lives. It is where we spend, let's face it, most of our life. So I want to unpack some of that with Mel today and see how do we focus amongst these busy workspaces so that we can truly thrive. So Mel, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ange. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's always so lovely to speak with you because we have actually connected before on a previous chapter of the podcast, which was all about a kid's life and a whole lot of other things that we talked about on there. It's just such an important topic that we're going to speak about today in this chapter of Distracted because, like I said, we spend so much of our time at work. So why is it that our workplace has such an important impact and such a big impact on our health and well-being?
Well, like you said, Ange, we spend so much time at work. And, if we look back and we look at how our workplaces have actually evolved, we've really just picked up the factory line mentality of how we worked in our really industrialized, labor-driven workforce and applied it to our office buildings. And unfortunately, that mentality doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for a very long time. And thankfully to the pandemic, we've actually kind of had this opportunity to reimagine and have been awoken to the fact that our workplaces really haven't been working for us for quite a while. And a lot of that comes down to noise. The open plan office has been the brunt of a lot of criticism for a very long time, but there are merit in some of those spaces, but it's got to be balanced out with the right spaces to support that really focused, concentrative, deep work that we all need to do, which is the large part of what we do in our everyday roles.
I do see so many of these fads, almost this, I guess they're fads that come and go frequently around, it could be in playgrounds where do you do soft fall? Do you do natural playgrounds? In workplace design, it was open planned or moving away from cubicles, but people, as you say, are now wanting different spaces. These fads that come and go, do they reflect some of what we're looking for out of our work? And are people sort of calling for change right now? And I guess why are they?
Yeah, they do reflect a lot of the differences that we're looking for in our workplaces. And there's a few reasons for that. I think people have got to the point where the workplace that they're in doesn't work. And, if I look at some of the clients that I've worked with, their workplaces aren't working because they're outdated. They haven't kept up with the evolving technology. So the style and construction of their individual workspaces are suited to a different era of technology. We want to work differently. We're not really working in these silos anymore. We're working a lot more cross-departmentally across organisations because we're not in this sort of factory line delivery anymore. We used to sort of do our little piece, our widget, and we'd move it on to the next team and they do their widget. Things move a lot more rapidly now, and so there needs to be a lot more integration of teams across these workplaces. And so our workplaces need to shift to support that. Some of the fads that we do see, though, there is some merit in them, but when I work with an organisation, we really start at the beginning and understand who they are as a business, what's their organisational goals, what's their vision, what's their values, what is their purpose, because every organisation is going to have a different goal for why they're actually in business, and what does all of that mean from a corporate strategy. We're then going to look at the departments, who's in there, how they work, who they interact with, what that communication flow looks like. And then we start to sculpt this workplace around all of those needs. Now, if you're not unpacking it to that level of detail, you're really kind of just guessing, or you're going, I really like that workplace that so-and-so's got down the road. Let's build ourselves one of them. Or my favorite color is pink. Let's paint everything in here pink. And the good old one I love is our brand colors are blue. We're just going to make everything blue. And, that's well and good if you don't have had the opportunity to do the work. But when you actually look and unpack those brand experience traits of how do we actually want people to feel when they do business with us, and that's whether it's our clients or it's our employees, that is where we start to extract that brand essence. And when we really understand that brand essence, that's when we can start to guide the way that our space needs to actually come together, the way it needs to be assembled in order to elicit that feeling. So that would then inspire the look and the feel, the materials, the textures, the colors, and even the way that we lay out those spaces, the way that we move through a space, the order that we do things, and the types of spaces that are in there, because they'll facilitate different types of work. So if we sort of think about that for a little bit, a lot of the work that you do is about being focused. So we need to create spaces that elicit that need or the behavior of us doing focused concentrative work. Now, to do that, we would create spaces that are clearly indicative for one person. So whether it's a small quiet room or it's a high back lounge chair, it's cocooning you, there's materials and fabrics that are quite textural, and it brings with it the different type of energy that you would bring to sit in that space and the type of work that you would do. So we can start to guide behavior in the workplace by really understanding what is it that people need to do here and in what proportion of space as well. So collaboration versus quiet space, depending on the type of business that they are, and then providing those spaces appropriate to that particular organisation. All of that can start to support the individuals in how they actually need to work and get their jobs done.
Wow, there's so much more conversation that needs to be had, isn't there, than just brand colors?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're looking at brand story, employee experience, how people move through spaces. And one of the things that I heard you talking about then was that difference between when we do our deep work and when we do collaborative work. And we know that our workspace has such a big impact on how well and how deep we can go with our work and how collaborative we can be in those spaces. What I want to ask you, I guess more so because you've done some of the most, as I mentioned in the introduction, Entain, Hall Chadwick, Fathom, City of Gold Coast, you've designed such beautiful spaces. What have been some of the impacts that you've seen pre-consultation and pre-strategy to post? And what were some of the different feelings that people had in these spaces?
Yeah, one of my favorites of all time is Hall Chadwick. Now, Hall Chadwick are actually an accounting firm. When we started working with them, they had a very traditional style of office. It was grey carpet, looked like doctors' waiting room sort of chairs sitting in their reception space. Their reception desk was kind of like this off-the-shelf thing. And talking of brand colours, they had the maroon logo kind of plastered up on the wall. You go back a house and there was these really high petitions. There was no natural light. There was lots of filing. Like it was really depressing. And they will agree that it just didn't elicit anything about who they are. And by going through our process of engaging with them and talking to their employees and understanding who they were as a business, what we discovered was that their founder had actually come from Longreach 40 years prior. The majority of the directors in the business were all from Western Queensland, and they had a very large agricultural client base, yet none of that was evident in this workspace. So the journey that we took those guys on was that we wanted to bring those Western Queensland real country values to life in the space. And we did that by having this beautiful big open entry where you come in through reception and you go into a big cafe space, and it's a communal area between clients and employees. And then, bringing that to life, we used these beautiful red pavers that were sort of likened to the red dirt. We had recycled timbers. We used leather. We even had like horse bits as the decorative ornament on the banquette seating. So there were all these really subtle cues around who they were, where they'd come from, and what was important to them as an organisation. So they were very relaxed, laid back. The kitchen was there in terms of that, come in and have a cuppa and make yourself at home. So they had this beautiful space there. And then we took that and we ran that through the back of house as well, where all of the team work, and we created library spaces for them to be able to go and, read a document in quiet without having to sit at their desk all the time. So variety of space for them to be able to utilize. And the results that we got from that particular case were really outstanding. So we saw, increased employee engagement, we saw increased happiness, their communication and relationships improved. Their general job satisfaction had improved as a result of going through this process, because they felt far more connected to that particular organization, and they could sort of see themselves in that space because we got that brand story right and communicated that through all of those touch points in that physical environment.
So I would imagine right now, people that are listening, if they're listening at work, they would be looking around their environment going, okay, ours does not look like that. So for those people that who are in a workspace that haven't had someone like you come in and weave your magic as you do in your workplaces, what can they do and what's in their control to be able to change their workspace so that they can be focused and they can be motivated and have those off-sided benefits that they can have in a space that inspires them?
Yeah, when you're in a commercial workplace that, you're employed and you're in that office and it's really kind of outside your control, it does make it a little bit difficult. But little things that I have recommended to people in the past go down to, if you do have your own desk, and a lot of organizations are moving away from that, but I'm presuming if you're in one of these environments still, you probably still own your own desk. Personalize it a little bit. So bring in some plants and things, because greenery is fantastic for us. We're human animals. We're meant to be in amongst plants and nature, not in built concrete boxes. And unfortunately, I think we've forgotten that over time. So greenery connects us back to nature and can have some really great psychological benefits for us. Just even thinking about how we can move around spaces to support different types of work. And I know that can be quite difficult when you're in an environment where you've really only got the three standard typologies, which is the office, the meeting room, and the workstation. That makes it a little bit tricky. But if there is a corner of the office that's a little bit quieter, that might support you to be able to do some more of that deep concentrative thinking, then that's what I would recommend sort of trying to seek out. Or if you do have the flexibility to be able to work from home, and I know a lot more people have that opportunity now, think about how we structure the flow of our week. Do the really deep concentrative work that you need to do at home, because that way you've probably got a much more control over your environment and who's around, unless you've got small kids, which that's a whole other story. But then using your workplace to really create that point of connection and that socialization. So that's when we go back in. We're quite happy to do sort of lower cognitive work, because we're happy to be interrupted, engage in conversation, participate in meetings, those sorts of things. So I think having that ability to be mindful about what type of work we're going to do in what location, that's what I've started to see organizations that don't have spaces that are facilitating this variety of work types and style have a lot more control over how they work by just thinking about where they're doing their work and what type of work they're doing.
Such important and valuable insights there, Mel. Things that I'm like, yeah, of course, you do actually have control over some of your workspace. It can feel like you don't. But I love that deep work concept about going home to do it if your space is a space that you do have control over. Because one of the things that we know when it comes to focus is you understanding how your brain works and understanding your preferences for work. And sometimes I know I hear it a lot when I'm working with clients around either remotivating or inspiring their teams or even themselves as a leader. Workplace is often, and workspace is often one of the number one things where they go, I walk in here and I feel sad, or
Mm.
I walk in here and I don't feel motivated. And some of those things, if people are listening that Mel's just gone through, I love that, because it gives that sense that you are actually in control of your environment, no matter sort of where you find yourself. And Mel, you recently posted, and I absolutely loved this. You shared it that it was, I've got to remember what it was now, that your workplace well-being, so workplace well-being is more than a fruit bowl.
Yes.
The workplace well-being is more than a fruit bowl. I think I've got that correct. And I
Yeah.
remember just looking at it
Yeah.
going, that is a really great title. Can you unpack what you meant by that and how that applies to workplaces today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we operate our company and our services under our workplace dynamics blueprint. And one of the pillars in that blueprint is around well-being. And when we talk about well-being with organizations, we're talking about mental and emotional well-being just as much as physical well-being. And I think in the past, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, like I previously thought of well-being in the workplace as purely a physical thing. And it wasn't until we went through the pandemic and I really got a grip on what the mental and emotional impacts of our well-being in our workplaces really were. And so when I have these conversations with clients about, well, what's the well-being policy look like in the organization? What's your strategy? How are we kind of working through that? Often I was met with, oh, we've got a fruit box or we do a step count challenge. And I'm like, okay, well, that's very topical. It's lovely that you do that. And that's a great first step. But it was kind of like this band-aid fix that was going on over the top. And so it was only through my own research of really digging in and kind of understand, what does well-being at work actually mean? And it's so much more than, just giving people a fruit box and going, yeah, I tick, you've got your veggie or your fruit intake for the day. It's much more about looking at the system of how we operate our organisation. Do our values promote well-being? Do our spaces support our well-being? If we're saying that this is something that's important to us and this is our strategy, how is our physical environment actually backing that up? So examples of that are we providing places for people to be able to do that deep concentrative work? Are we providing places where people can go and relax and recuperate? Or let's say they've just had a really shitty conversation with someone or something's not gone well at work. Have they got somewhere they can just go and take 5 minutes and kind of, regroup themselves without having to be in the toilets? How are we supporting our working mums returning to work when they need to pump, for their babies? All of those sorts of things, and thinking about, well, what is our well-being strategy and how is that actually being infused into our work environment? And little things could be around using sit-to-stand desks, providing people with Bluetooth headsets so they're not tied to a desk if we've still got, old school desk phones. It could be installing a set of stairs between floors rather than encouraging people to use the lift. So all of these sorts of incidental exercise pieces, and I know installing a set of stairs isn't something you just do. You do that in the planning of your workplace, but it's something to be consciously thinking about. If your organization is over multiple levels, having these stairs creates huge benefits because it actually gives us visual connectivity as well. So that we're ticking a mental and emotional box there as well because we're building connection. And people kind of go, well, emotional well-being, what does that mean and how does that show up in the workplace? Well, that really boils down to how we build relationships. How are we actually encouraging people to build those social connections and to feel like they have a sense of belonging here in our workplaces? So we're trying to tick all of these boxes because if we make sure that our people feel emotionally well, we've got a higher chance of ensuring that they're mentally well, and then we've got the energy to actually be physically well as well. So it's kind of like this domino effect, and that's kind of how I look at workplaces and well-being when I'm approached with a client.
Mm. I can remember you were talking about sort of installing stairwells, and I can remember doing a program with a whole lot of doctors and frontline workers in a hospital, and I was having deep conversations with them around how they manage their own well-being and how do they cope with a lot of the vicarious trauma that happens as a part of their work. And I was amazed with how many of our healthcare workers would go and lock themselves in the stairwell. And we know what stairwells look like in hospitals. They're not pretty. They're cold. They're white. They're just very sterile. And here we were, people who have either had to deal with, telling a family member that somebody had passed away, or dealing negative news to somebody about their progress, or even just having a really tricky day. That there was no spaces for them to go and decompress and have those difficult conversations. And what they would do is walk into the stairwell on their own, in tears, sometimes in anger, sometimes, just holding on, and then looking at their watch and needing to sort of suck it up, walk in and go back and do it again. And I could see the emotional turmoil that was happening for people, but it would start as an emotional turmoil that people were facing, and then it would become a physical. And we saw a lot of burnout and a lot of people themselves, doctors and nurses, getting sick themselves because they weren't, when you look back at it, allowed those spaces and that time to have conversations when things were really difficult for them. So I've really witnessed firsthand, Mel, exactly what you're talking about with people who they really need to have those spaces that enhance their own well-being, because that's what they're trying to do for us, right?
Yep.
And I'm sure it's not just our health professionals either. It's people across lots of industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of
Mel, before we finish up, I've just got a couple more questions for you. I feel like I could talk to you a lot longer. um, if there's a leader that's listening to this episode, somebody who has got a team of people that they're wanting to keep inspired and show them that they care, they're worried about burnout, their team is, in the constant face of change, and we know this is not industry specific. What can that leader do if their space is, I guess, a fixed space right now? What can they do to help keep their team inspired and create a space that keeps them motivated and connected to the work that they do?
It's a tricky thing because a lot of those things are outside of a lot of leaders' hands. It's at that organizational level. But some of the things that I have seen different teams do, and if I start back at the beginning, it's really about coming up with an agreement as a team as to how we're going to interact and how we're going to communicate. So, what are the norms for us as a team? When are we meeting? And particularly now that we are working in these distributed ways, what I'm seeing so much are organizations and teams that they're coming in and out of the office because they want flexibility, but they're not coordinated. So the entire team is never in the same space at once. So, half the team might be in on Monday, the other half might be in Tuesday, but they're never all in the office on the same day. And I think that's impacting some of that social fabric within our teams, that cohesiveness, because those bonds are being weakened. So one of the things that I highly recommend is considering an anchor day with your team. So there's one day a week where you all are in the office together, but you have a set of routines and rituals around what you're doing on those particular days. It's not being in the office for the sake of it. I'm definitely not advocating for that. It needs to be purposeful. So are we having a weekly meeting? Are we having a lunch or a morning tea together? Are we, building that social capital in that team so that when we are in that distributed way, we have got that connection to one another and we're less likely to kind of suffer in silence? Well, phone a colleague and go, hey, this has happened, because that's the other concern that we have now with wellbeing is that if something's happening and it's happening in the privacy of someone's own home, nobody else is witnessing that within the team. So they're not able to kind of reach out and offer that support. But if we've got that social network built with our team and quite strongly when we are together, then we'll reach out for that support ourselves. And I suppose they're kind of more the fundamentals of how we structure and work and the flow of our work. But in terms of the actual space, it could be as simple as, as I said, adding in some plants. It might be, the other thing I really like to do is bring in either an air diffuser or a candle or something so that we've got some sense of smell, really starting to appeal to those senses. One of the other things that I see a lot of is really high petitions, which create such barriers between teams. And if they are of a certain style, a lot of the time you can actually remove the panels that sit inside the frame, which then gives you that visibility through the space. And I've seen it done where we've removed those panels and, the devil's ivy that you've got there in the background, we've seen that woven around and through those panels and becomes a bit of a green wall. So creating as much natural light as possible, giving that green space, giving a space some personality, and that could be at a team level. So when we've even gone down the path of organizations who are sharing desks and they're having these sorts of areas that belong to their team, they've got a shared bookshelf, and that's where they put, their communal family photos and their knickknacks and, resource texts and awards and things like that. So it becomes this shared space for the team to be kind of all in on it and start to have this sense of pride around themselves and that sense of identity as a team. So they're just a couple of tips. It is a bit trickier when you don't own the space, but at an organizational level, it is really easy to attack some of that low-hanging fruit to create more of this space. And we actually just released an article on it, so I can share the link with you on that, on how to kind of take some quick wins and uplift your space. And another one of those things is there a section of the office that we can designate that part of it to quiet work so that we can all go down there and do that really deep work where there's no phones and no talking? Can we remove a couple of workstations and put in some collaboration spaces in a completely different space to where the quiet rooms are too, by the way? Don't put them side by side. I've seen that happen. It's not a great outcome. But places that we can sit down and have lunch together that isn't at our desk. A lot of organisations I've seen are still struggling to provide the appropriate kitchen amenities. They've still got those very small tea points with nowhere to eat other than at your desk. So there's some really easy ways. And the number one way to kind of create this is to do a cleanup. The amount of crap that I see in offices when I go in there, just redundant paper, the Christmas decorations are still sitting in the hallway. Like, have a really good cleanup, because you'd be surprised at how much stuff you've just been hoarding in your
Oh my
workplace.
gosh, Mel, I think I just had the biggest tightness in my chest when you said that. I was like, straight away, I wanted to jump in and go, let me at them, let me
Yep.
at them.
Yep. Bring in a skip bin, fill it up, because it's clutter and that creates mental load for us as well. So that's probably another great tip. Clean your desk. If it looks
Yes.
messy, clean it up, because it'll be taking up cognitive space because you're distracted by all of the rubbish and stuff that's kind of hanging around on your desk.
Oh, Mel, I love that. And there's so much content in this, 25 minutes. I'm going to link everything to, I do all the links to your podcast, to your book, where people can buy and purchase your book directly from your website. It is a fantastic read. And what I love, Mel, about the work that you do, it's not just about making workspaces pretty, and it's not just about looking and going, geez, that looks really lovely. What it is there's so much thought has gone into the back end of how people need to be working, and also the individualization of how people think, how they work, what inspires them. I have no idea how you do what you do, Mel, because you incorporate so many different aspects to make these beautiful, functional, inspired spaces. But if people want to know more about the work you do, what is the easiest place that they can find you?
The best place to look for me is over at my website, which is melissamarsden.com.au, and you'll find access to resources, free resources there, and blogs, and that's where you also find my book and links to my podcast.
Always so many ways to find you, Mel. Thank you so much for joining us here on Distracted. I'm sure our listeners have got so much value out of it. And even if you just took one thing from the conversation with Mel today, I can guarantee you that it will have a big ripple effect, not just on your own focus, your own energy, your own way that you use your time, but if you can also turn the light out and look at, sort of shine the light on the rest of your team and go, how can I make a positive impact for my team, you will see such a ripple effect across the whole organization. So thanks so much, Mel, for joining us here on Distracted.
Absolute pleasure, Ange. Thanks for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with somebody that you might find is maybe struggling in their own motivation at work, or is needing to be inspired again. If you could share this episode, they would be hugely grateful, I'm sure. But if you've loved this, please rate and just thank you so much for your time joining me here on Distracted. I love the work I do. I love helping you be able to find more time, more energy and focus in your life. So thanks for joining me. I'm Angela Lockwood.